work with Carbon Gap. We are a non-profit, philanthropically funded independent think tank focused on scaling removals in Europe and beyond. So obviously tracking policy developments and advocating for them is our bread and butter. And I'll take you through a bit of the policy landscape globally. It'll be kind of a whistle-stop tour, and I'm more than happy to dive into any individual policies, directly or maybe through some questions at the end. And naturally, yeah, I will have a bit more of a focus on Europe and the UK because that's my kind of area. But happy to try and give an indication of what's happening more widely. So I think as Chris already explored at the beginning, we have a critical, huge scale need for CDRs. Globally, we need to get to a point in 2050 where the volumes of CO2 being traded are comparable in size to the traded volumes in the oil and gas sector. So it's an enormous challenge. We have a major CDR gap, and Alex has already sort of outlined the volumes that we're seeing in the voluntary market, but there's a real need for intervention to bring that to the kind of scales that will be really meaningful in terms of delivering kind of climate neutrality globally. And that's kind of where policy becomes highly salient. So in terms of what the policy landscape looks like today, in terms of our work, we broadly divide this into 3 buckets. Firstly, governance and standards. So that's kind of the underpinning framework that sets the rules for CDR, sets out, how and why CDR is needed and how it gets used. And that can be, quality frameworks for projects, but it's also targets, access, rules about who accesses CDR, given its limited availability, and really just kind of sets the architecture for this sector. And then we have sort of policies demand side, which are critical for kind of making maturing a market for removals, making this something that's ultimately investable because we know that there will be a need for CDR in future. And then finally the supply side. So how do we bring these methods, many of which are nascent, through the innovation life cycle, deliver the much needed research and development, the deployment incentives that allow early demonstration and bring these out of the lab, novel finance instruments, underpinning infrastructure, etc. So these are kind of 3 key areas of work and areas where policy is emerging, which I'll take you through. And really also just to highlight that we're very actively tracking this policy landscape, and we have recently launched our policy tracker tool, a supersized version 2.0, which you'll find on our website, and I'd encourage you to use as a supplementary tool when you're navigating this landscape to know how different member states and different European countries are performing against a range of policy indicators in those buckets I've just mentioned. So I'll dive straight in with a bit of a look at the governance and standards landscape. And you'll see that in each of these slides, I'm just going to highlight, not comprehensively, but highlight a few important policy developments. And I've given a bit of an indicator of whether this is something that's in place or in development. It's a bit of a rudimentary metric, and there's kind of course, many gaps of policies that are not in place as well. But just to highlight several points on the governance and standards side, I think firstly, the national targets are really important. And this is an area where we see a fair amount of activity and discourse. Having a national CDR target that indicates what that country will need in terms of CDR is a really important underpinning element for any market, setting out kind of the policy direction, helping to some extent to resolve regulatory uncertainty by indicating that this is a policy area where there will be movement, where there'll be efforts to align incentives and make sure that that CDR can come forward. So one example is the UK, where we have targets in place for engineered removals for 2030 and 2035. These are non-binding, but they indicate, in line with science, what our removals needs are likely to be, and this has informed a fair amount of, activity on the market development side as well. This discussion at the EU level is a little bit more nascent and under negotiation, but we hope to see, very soon a specific target that will show what the EU's overall CDR needs will be as well. Now, on the project standards side, this is kind of where the EU kind of shines with its flagship carbon removal certification framework mechanism, which essentially sets out the rules that carbon removal projects will have to adhere to if they want to align with this European standard. And currently we have, since December, an overarching framework that sets out rules on measurement, additionality, the quality and sustainability of carbon removal projects, which helps to bring some transparency and standardization into the market and really set rules on what counts as quality. And there's some activity elsewhere outside the EU in this regard as well. The UK is looking to publish methodologies for 2 carbon removal methods, BECCS and DACCS. And the IPCC also has a work program on this as well to set some international rules. So this project standards component will really help to bring some, standardization, harmonization into voluntary markets and potentially compliance markets about what removals should look like and what good will look like, and prevent these kind of these issues and these kind of flashpoints that have emerged in the voluntary market in the past as well around quality, ensure we can kind of get ahead of those issues in advance. And a final point on sort of governance would be also the international trading. So this really links back into national targets in terms of saying, okay, so where are we going to get our removals from? What will be the rules in terms of, how we supply these, whether that's domestically or internationally? This will have a massive impact on kind of cost effectiveness as well. And that's kind of something that's under development via the Article 6 rulebook under the Paris Agreement. And yeah, kind of a really important point for that global market as well. So moving on to the supply side, as I said, this is, a technologically nascent area in many respects. We have, a whole host of different sort of innovative projects and ideas emerging, and some of these coming to commercial scale already, but many great ideas still kind of at the incubation phase. And so there's a real need for interventions that bring those forward, bring them out of the lab, and allow us to have this interesting, rich portfolio of different methods that are available to the market and available to those buyers that we'll talk about in a second. So in terms of supply side, a few key points to mention: the deployment incentives, the R&D support, and also the infrastructure. On the deployment incentive side, an area where we see a reasonable amount of activity. One kind of major example is the 45Q tax credit in the US, which has been a real stimulator of projects coming forward. It really, it's a tax credit of a fixed fee per ton of CO2 kind of injected and permanently stored. And that's applicable to DACCS as well as a range of CCS methods. And from industry, we're hearing that this has been a huge shaper of kind of certainty and kind of investability in the CDR market. And so some European kind of echoes of that, I guess, but in different forms. So in Denmark, we've recently had the launch of the NEX fund, which is a 300 million euro subsidy pool, which has recently granted kind of 6-year contracts to 3 different projects to provide a regular supply of removals. Sweden has launched a reverse auction system, which kind of competitively allocates subsidies to large-scale removals projects. And the UK is in the process of developing a similar mechanism through a contract for difference scheme, which will again provide a sort of fixed revenue top-up, or not a fixed revenue via a top-up to large-scale removals projects in the UK as well. So really seeing kind of efforts to create some kind of market de-risking, business model de-risking, and bring kind of certainty that will hopefully bring more investors into this space. In terms of R&D, there's a range of activity, Horizon, in terms of the LIFE programme, and also outside of the EU kind of remit. One example is the UK GGR Innovation Programme, which supported 23 projects that kind of to come from TRL 4 to TRL 6. So a few examples of kind of fostering innovation in this space, though, we are seeing a little bit of trickling off of that kind of support in 2025 and onwards after a kind of initial surge of effort. And then in terms of infrastructure, the EU is really pushing forward on trying to support the legal permitting framework and regulatory safety framework for CO2 transport and storage, which is a really necessary kind of de-risking aspect to make large-scale projects kind of come to bear, and kind of create this comprehensive supply chain. So interesting efforts there. And then finally, I'll just touch on the demand side. So I think this is a really critical point, and I think attention is increasingly turning to how we kind of create this demand certainty and revenue certainty in the CDR space. You know, the sort of end goal, the vision that everyone wants to see really is a compliance market, meaning a long-term predictable market, predictable demand that will kind of standardize how buyers engage with CDRs, create kind of a steady flow of revenues into that sector that will really make projects bankable. And we're seeing quite advanced efforts in the UK to integrate removals into its emissions trading scheme as a vehicle for CDR compliance, as well as some early discussions in the EU. Meanwhile, Japan has already integrated removals to some extent into its emissions trading. But in terms of the near term, before we can get this in place, public procurement has been a really important kind of focal point of discussion. The US has launched a $35 million scheme to basically procure innovative projects and bring those forward. Really important kind of catalytic impact on bringing forward early projects. And that's also mirrored by some private activity with some tech companies in particular, as Alex mentioned, coming together to procure early stage methods as well. Yeah, and then Alex also mentioned kind of SBTI and corporate standards, and this is a big unlock. And for sure, there's efforts in terms of net zero standards to bring sort of near-term CDR demand forward through SBTI, through ISO, and the EU Green Claims Directive will also be an important unlock in terms of standardizing engagement with CDRs and allowing corporates to know exactly what role they'll play and create a more standardized demand. So hopefully that didn't run too massively over time. And yeah, just to say, I mean, of course, this isn't a complete landscape. You know, there's a number of areas where policies are immature. You know, national targets aren't widespread. There is a massive gap. You know, carbon gap's estimated at 2.6 billion euro gap in terms of early stage support, and this is really an area where funding's needed at the sort of early stage innovation where it's hard to get access to finance. But where we really do see the maturity is in terms of that long-term framework, providing market certainty, providing revenue certainty through business models. And so, yeah, we're very positive about the future, and we're actively advocating to fill these gaps. So encourage you to look at our tracker, encourage you to look at our recent report on funding gaps, and encourage you to engage with CDR as much as possible. So thank you very much.
Thanks to you, Francesca.